Hi, y'all. It's Brigitte Cutshall with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Amanda Chay. She's an entrepreneur and author of a new book called The Girlfriend's Guide to Lupus. Can you say hi, Amanda?
Hi there. Thanks for having me on today.
I appreciate you being on, and we're not that far from each other. We're both in the Southeast,
That's right.
and she's had an interesting challenge, and her she didn't learn about it until she was an adult, right? So
Mm.
and this is probably what your experience learning about that you had lupus and you wrote this book. Can you tell me what actually compelled you to write a book about this experience?
When I was diagnosed, just like everyone else out there, I went home and Googled it, right? That's all you do, right? Your doctor says you have lupus, and you're like, okay, what is this? And, there's so much out there. It's such a funny disease that I didn't really get a good gist of it. So I ordered all those books on Amazon and I read through them, and they're very clinical, they're very dry, and I still didn't really know what was going on. So once I figured out what's going on with lupus. And I instantly decided, through the point I had to write a book for women, right? Because it was such a lonely time. I knew no one with this disease. And so I wanted to be able to give a resource that I so needed when I was diagnosed.
That's true, because there's, like you said, a lot of information out there is too clinical, and it
Mm.
means, I should say nothing, but it kind of, we
Mm.
need some emotion attached to it when you're dealing with it. And
We wanted the real
lupus,
things. Yeah.
yeah, real stuff. And lupus, you hear about it, but no one really understands what
Mhm.
it is. It's just like, what does that mean? And what are the
Mm.
symptoms? And it could be, it's confusing for the
Oh,
doctors too. Yeah,
it was
right.
confusing for me only if you could have seen me around my house when I was writing the book, I would repeatedly yell out loud, like, oh my God, this is terrible. And then I would like turn to my daughter and be like, this is sucky disease. You never want it. And I would go back in and read more because I thought I knew, but only when I dug really deep for such a long period of time, I'm like, wow, I finally had a gist of what this disease entails. And so I'm not surprised that many of us have no idea what it is.
Is it related to endocrinology a little, you know what I'm saying? Your endocrine system? I'm not.
Oh, I'm sure. The funny thing about lupus, but not the surprising thing, is that there are still a lot of unknowns. So I
Okay.
can give a little gist to the listener in case they don't know exactly what lupus is, besides the fact that, yes, Selena Gomez has lupus.
Right. I've heard
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
we all know that, right?
Right.
It is an autoimmune disease. It is chronic, meaning it can be very severe and it lasts for a long period of time. And in fact, it's currently incurable.
Oh,
Yeah, that's rough. So it's when your immune system that's supposed to keep out those viruses and those bugs turns on itself. And in particular with lupus, it attacks the cells of the eyes, the tissues, the organs. And the symptoms can be mild, like a butterfly rash, maybe some joint pain, and they can be severe, like extreme exhaustion. You can lose organs. You can have a huge increase of heart attack and stroke and cancer, and people actually still continue to die from this disease.
mm.
So it shows up uniquely for every single person, just like your thumbprint. And that's why I think a lot of us have a hard time understanding lupus. It can be so minor, it can be so major. It's just hard to put your hand on and say, hey, it's not like Sjogren's where it affects your eyes and your mouth primarily.
So what you're saying is, how does it, everybody's different. So
Mm.
what do you think some of the common symptoms that um,
Mhm.
you're experiencing?
The most common symptoms that people experience when they have lupus are stiff, swollen joints, fatigue, but more than just like I'm a little bit tired, like extreme exhaustion, hard getting up and getting dressed and moving throughout your day. Some people have fevers usually around 100 or below, and you can have mouth and nose sores or mouth ulcers, they call them. At times, there's even hair loss, which is very concerning. And then I think it was roughly 50% of people have anemia, so problems with
Oh,
that stored iron in their body. But
wow.
here's the funny thing about all those things. They can show up in many different illnesses too, right?
Correct. Right.
Yeah, and they went, oh, you have psoriatic arthritis, you have rheumatoid arthritis. They thought I had all these other things. And I am no different than many other people where it takes usually somewhere between 5 to 7 years to get diagnosis. That's how hard it is.
Yeah, that's like I said, I've heard of it, but it's not I don't think it's common.
It's not common. Now, 1.5 million people in America have lupus. 90% are women.
Really.
You asked about, is it that endocrine? I'm like, yeah, like we don't know specifically, but 90% are women. We're pretty thinking that estrogen comes involved.
That's right. I just the only people I've heard that had it have been women. I mean, I
Mm,
don't know a lot. I don't know anybody other than Salima.
mm-hmm.
Did I say her name right? And then you.
Selena. Yeah. Now
Selena,
you tell
sorry.
me. That's right. It's okay.
It's something that I'm sure affects you mentally too, because you're like, what is wrong with me, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah. And the rates of just alone depression and anxiety, like the general population, I think anxiety is 20%, but with lupus, it's 40%. And
wow.
depression is 3.8% for the general population and 19% for people with lupus. Does lupus bring on these things, or do you have these things as a result of dealing with lupus? That part is unknown, but the mental aspect is so significant. We should, of course, never separate our mind from our body because they all work
You're
together.
definitely connecting. You can heal yourself, maybe. I mean, heal
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
physically and mentally. And that makes me think of, I would think when you're having this kind of pain, does it affect your ability to even like exercise? I'm just,
Oh yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I'm a big just like you, I'm a big exercise person. Thankfully, I have decades under my belt of doing
right.
things like that. And it was, very sad to not be able to continue to pound the pavement and run and lift and jump and do all these things. Now I still lift, I still pound the pavement, but walking this time. So I've learned that
Yeah,
it is still just as essential as it was before, but I have to do it a different way, or else I suffer through the consequences of my own actions.
exactly. Then you could accelerate it or make it worse if you're not moving. It's right at a minimum. You just got to get up and walk if you can,
Yes.
if at all possible. And it's all connected, like you said, the body and your mind. And as you're talking, is this you think it's more prevalent in our culture in the United States? I'm just curious.
Yes. So there are 5 million people we know that are diagnosed worldwide and 1.5 million in the US. But I think very, very heavily this is undiagnosed in other countries, right?
Right.
Because
I was just
there's so many other things. Maybe they don't have the resources. So I don't think it's that the US has just a ton of them and it turns to, what's going on in the US. I just think we have access to the healthcare and the resources, and our scientists and clinicians are here.
and we have people who are willing to help look at this. Yeah, we hope. And
Yes.
so do you have what's the word, a strategy to find the right kind of doctor? Because
Mm.
that's a really specialized field. And I don't think I've ever met with a rheumatologist because my issue is different. Mine
Oh,
was
yeah.
cancer related. So how many rheumatologists do you think are out there?
Mhm. I believe my number in the book was like, don't quote me on this, something like 5,500, but we need a lot more. And several, are leaving the industry from retirement or for whatever reason. And only the need just continues to grow. So I live in, as I mentioned, Raleigh, which has several big universities and medical teaching institutes here. So I do have access. I'm very blessed the fact that we have two different lupus practices, lupus clinics specifically. So that is a rarity in that. But even that, my first one, I waited 8 months to get in.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I was being referred from my rheumatologist to a specialist. So, when your specialist refers you to a specialist, you're in trouble
That's
or
true.
you're going to get in good care. So I would tell people, oh, you have the right to be relentless when it comes to your health.
Oh,
I
yeah.
am. I'm like, you better watch out. If I know my rights and I've gone through learning my federal rights, I also learned that there are state rights as a patient, and you should learn your state rights. You take those and you go out there and you find, you get into a rheumatologist, you go through the whole point of it. And if it doesn't, you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel heard, you feel like you're going through medical gaslighting, you don't like what they have to say. The good thing is you always can get a second opinion and a third opinion. I would tell someone, even though it's long and yes, it takes a lot of time, you are worth that fight until you feel like you've got someone good to care for you.
Yeah, that's kind of similar to what I had to deal with. I had to see lots of specialists and
Mm,
be, but I was doing research too, and my issue was something very rare, very, very rare. And so they did
mm,
not know what to do with me. But that's
mm.
because I did research and asked questions. And sometimes you have to go with your gut instinct too on who to work with. Even though you have
Absolutely.
multiple opinions, you still have to go with what's best for your situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As an example, not my current physician, but my last rheumatologist I was with took me only 2 months to get in with her. And there's no way to say it. She was a really sucky rheumatologist. She was bad. In fact, I wanted to like call the medical board on her, but she was my current rheumatologist and I could not get in anywhere else. I was still waiting for months to get to that other one. And I just had to get whatever shoddy care I could get from her, which I did end up getting. Like these things are just a reality of life. I can't just be like, that's terrible. I'm going to go find someone else because sometimes that's not an option. And you need someone to run blood work on you and you need someone to look over you to make sure that you're not doing terrible at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences where doctors were, I didn't have a good vibe with, I shouldn't say vibe, but I was able to find, asked around and got some referrals. But it's something you just got to be persistent. And when
Mm.
did you get diagnosed with this? Was it before COVID or during
It
COVID?
was technically during COVID. So I have most likely had lupus since the very first pregnancy I had, and that daughter is now 23. So I had a
Right.
very, very,
Oh,
very rough
wow. Right.
pregnancy. But diseases like this progress in stages, and I went through another autoimmune disease diagnosis, and I probably had this all along, but officially it's only been a few years ago. But to me, I'm exactly the same as I was 2 decades ago. My struggles and my fights. And then,
Right.
6 months after that, my oldest daughter, that one that gave me such a hard pregnancy, she was diagnosed with lupus too. And that's not very common, but it is doubly sucky for a family to have two
Yeah, it
people.
is. That's kind of, yeah. Does it sound like it's genetic?
There
And
is. Yeah, that's a good point. There is a genetic variation. There's hundreds of genetic variations, but you holding on to those variations doesn't mean you're going to get lupus. You need that environmental trigger. For me, that was
right.
a really rough pregnancy. And for my oldest daughter, Anna, that was having mono in college.
Ah, okay. That triggered the
Yep. Once lupus comes, it's there. It's all bursty and, happy to wage some inflammation in your body.
wow. So as you're talking, this environmental can trigger it. Is there certain things you can do to help
Mm.
reduce that? Like what
Oh
you,
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and I have a younger daughter and I am very vigilant on her as well. And she knows like for people with lupus, sun exposure is significant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we often have to stay, covered up in the sun. We hope that pale becomes the new uh,
Cool thing.
way to go through life. Ooh, really rock that. So, like with her, I'm like, okay, we always watch out for the sun. I try to, get her to stay away from anyone with these big illnesses. You know, all the other parts of your health, but there's many components that we can't help. Like we can't help, like a car accident may bring on lupus. Some having COVID may bring on it. So I think just taking the best care of yourself in prevention is always the way to go through life. It's always, always the answer is to try to prevent versus react.
Correct. Prevent is something I'm definitely for. I mean, being I call it also proactive too. I mean, you
Yes.
can't stop anything, but you can maybe reduce the symptoms.
Oh, that's, yeah. I
Yeah.
made that point in the book. Like
Yeah.
the healthier you are, the more manageable your lupus will be. Yes, lupus has robbed you with a giant chunk of your health. That's stolen away. That's just a fact, right? You no longer can you check like, how healthy are you? Excellent. You don't check that, but you
Right.
still have control of your health, right?
Right.
Everything you do on every single day impacts you and how you live and how you feel and how you function.
So what food do you think helped you the most that you did you switch to? Or
Well, luckily, I was ready, right? I was ready. I've read all these clinical studies and I'm like, okay, if it tells me like gluten free, I have to eat this type of one fish, I will do it. I'm so ready. And the results were pretty vague, right? They don't think there's not a single diet that you need to be on for
okay.
lupus, which is freeing. And the way you should eat is probably very similar to the way you should eat for cancer or heart disease or way to stay healthy. Lots of plants, lots of vegetables. Let's get some
Exactly.
lentils. Let's get some fiber. Let's get some legumes in there.
What I did, what I learned to help me heal was I saw a holistic endocrinologist, and he did
Mhm.
testing on me to see if I was allergic to any kind of food. And it turned out for me, it was dairy. It was
Oh,
like casein protein, specific to casein
ah,
protein. And there was no connection because it takes like 4 hours for your stomach to start digesting something like that.
oh
That's
yeah.
why I didn't trigger. And I didn't, and I'm so glad. So that I saw this doctor, but it was hard to get off of it because it's good and addict. It is,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's in
but
everything, right? It's kind of like some
yes,
of these other things in everything.
that's why if I buy something with a label on it, I look and make sure there's no casein
Yeah.
protein in there or any kind of, just because it's some people's like, oh, no big deal. I'm like, it is a big deal. After,
Yeah. Oh
you've
yeah. Yeah.
had
Yeah.
some health issues, it's not worth it. I don't want to go be popping pain medicine because what it caused me was pain, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And but when I stopped eating dairy, I had isn't that weird?
All better. Yeah. Yeah. I know. That's well, at least you found that out, right?
Right.
That's
And that's because I thought it was worth seeing this doctor. I don't think I had to pay for it out of pocket, whatever. But
mm.
we have to find things that work best for us. And instinctively, I didn't want to ever have dairy, Amanda. You know
Mm.
what I'm
Oh,
saying?
oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that often with meat, right? I'm not
Yes.
a vegetarian, but I'm often like, oh, I don't want to. Like I
Right.
just
And
feel the need.
it could have an effect when your all genetic disposition is different. And now
Yeah.
all this, you were told by marketing, you got to have dairy for your calcium. No, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's
Yeah.
it's added to the milk, and it could be. I'm sure when I was younger, I didn't have an issue with it. It's just as I've aged, as part of
Yeah.
it. I'm not saying that's when I was young, I had that issue, but my brain was telling me don't do it. But
Well, I think it's interesting. One thing I talk about in the book in the beginning and all the way through is that I want people to develop deeper self-awareness, right?
yes,
We think, most of us think we have it, but research shows that about 80% of us, yeah, we're probably lacking in a lot of that. But when we know more about ourselves and when we're curious, like when we honor that, like, oh, I don't want to eat that meat, or your body's like, I don't want to have that ice cream. When we honor that and we're like, okay, that's interesting, then we're not constantly, trying to deal with a body that's reacting to everything. So if we just
right.
understand like, ooh, why was it so hard to go to the bathroom this morning? Okay, let me think. I was really busy and I didn't drink a lot of water. Okay. I figured that out. Let me try to do this better.
Drink more water, right? Just little simple things, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think little small steps will help you figure out what's the right thing to do rather than extreme changes. That's just what I've learned. I'm sure
Mm.
you did too.
Oh
Little
yeah,
steps.
absolutely. It's not running a marathon. It's simply getting
Correct.
outside and walking. Yeah. It's
Right.
not
That's
being
all it is.
vegan, raw vegan, who only eats fruit that fell from the tree, right? No, it's like, look,
Right.
yeah, just come on, add an extra serving, just one serving of fruit today, and maybe
That's all
not
you got to do.
sugar.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Just start
it's
small, people. It's not the big things that we think are going to impact us. It's really this.
right. Oh God, that's so funny. Um, all right, I'm just trying to get back to the lupus thing. So you probably in the same thing, you need to have like a group to help you. You can't do this alone to figure it out. You
Mm,
have to have a support group.
yes.
So what was since you didn't know anybody that had it, how did you reach out to anybody? Did you
Mm.
just curious?
Well, I mean, luckily, as I mentioned, Anna was diagnosed just a few months later. So I instantly had a lupus bestie that I never
Okay,
wanted with my daughter. So that was very helpful.
right.
And quite honestly, I made a lot more friends with lupus simply by writing the book. I would
Yeah,
interview people and I'm like, oh, and almost all of us were like this. I don't have any lupus friends. I don't either. Let's be friends. Right. So that was one way to do things like that. Um, Also on Instagram is just, kind of a place where I am. And there's a lot of lupus people out there.
oh really?
So that's nice to have that, shared friendship with a cause. And that's helped me there. But for me, I have to be a very wise consumer of what I look at. Like my husband wants to watch TV at 9 o'clock, starts a movie where, zombies are attacking you and it's all crazy. For me, being cautious, I'm like, no, you watch that. I'm going to go up to bed. Now, the same thing. Why do I say that? How does that pertain? But when I think of like on social media, at times it can be hard to follow a lot of lupus stuff or any like cancer stuff where everything is rough and people are talking about their challenges. So I've learned to kind of give myself some distance there, to not always sit and to be in it. It's like watching the news. You can't always hang out in there because it feels really
Oh,
dark. And sometimes you got to pull yourself out and go watch something funny on TikTok, or go outside and well, pick up some leaves.
right. Just do a little bit of movement, right?
Yeah,
I think
just break it out of what you see.
yeah. It's as you were talking, I was thinking that forgot what I was thinking. Uh so when you have lupus, like does it bother you if you do any like traveling or anything? I didn't know if
Oh,
I was just
that's
curious.
very sad truth. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, that is yeah. I mean, I say that, but literally just a few weeks ago, I just came back from Uganda, where I was gone for a few weeks and it was really rough. But this was the first time ever in my life that I'd been gone, I don't remember, 11 hours away, time zone, and I still remained healthy. And that's because I've learned that the ways to travel that work for me. And for me, that is one down to my core. I love to travel. I won't give that up, but I will make accommodations in order for my lupus to hang along and not be so bad. But know that most of my other travels, I have come back feeling terrible and I've suffered and I've brought myself into a flare. But I knew it was so important to me that I had to do something different.
Right. I love to travel too, and
Mm.
I never got sick, really. I don't it just I was just wondering because it can the time
Oh
zone
yeah, yeah.
differences because you're tired. Usually when you have lupus, you're fatigued, and I didn't know if that had affected you. That's why I was
Absolutely. One rheumatologist told me that any change in your environment can bring on the chance of a flare,
could
which makes you feel
trigger.
like you should do the same thing every single day and eat the same thing, but that's not really how we want to live. So it's just to be a conscious, like, okay, I'm going to a different time zone, or I'm going to be traveling overnight on this long flight. Okay, how can I take care of myself during that time?
Right, that's a good point. Right. You just gotta tweak it a little bit
Yeah.
and you don't want to do the same thing over and over again.
No. And maybe like you want to go out with friends and have drinks. So maybe you just have one drink and then you drink some water afterwards. And maybe you don't stay out with them till 2 in the morning. Maybe you come home a little bit easier, and they're your friends, are going to understand. So, modifications, while we may not want them, they're a reality of what life brings us.
That's true. So as we're close to wrapping up, do you think the biggest takeaway or lesson for you on this to give advice to somebody?
Mm,
I know one's probably hard, but you can do it more than one if you want, but I'm just
yeah,
curious.
yeah, no. Let's come up with one. Um, yeah, we'll just say we've already mentioned the one about your health still remains in your hands. That's very key. You can control part of that health, while you might not always be able to control lupus. The other thing I would want people and women to remember is that they are not their lupus. When you get a diagnosis, when you get the cancer diagnosis, when you get the lupus diagnosis, that's who you are. Right. And someone at the grocery store tries to give you plastic bags and you're like, hold up, I have lupus. Don't you bother to do that. Right. It
Right.
became for me like a shield of going through life. But I learned that I am not my lupus. And so that allows me the perspective of being like, lupus can get in the bag, being a mom, being a wife, all these things can get to the back. And at the core, I've got to remember and take care of who I am really is me.
It's true. It's you, and we're all different. And I like that takeaway. For my issue, I did the same thing. It doesn't define me. It's
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, you got to learn that and I like to embrace what I can do now, right? Just like
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's just a turn of perspective.
right, you can still do certain things.
Yeah,
And I think this is
excellent.
really cool. And I'm so glad that you shared your story and where can people get your book, The Girlfriend's Guide to Lupus?
You can go on Amazon, this new store that you can buy everything.
That's true. By anything at the same time,
Anything.
anything. And
Yes.
where can people learn more about you? I mean, you have a website.
Yes, I have a website, Amanda Chay, which is Chay, and then you can follow me on Instagram at Amanda E. Chay.
That is so cool. And I really appreciate your time. And I love your sense of humor because I've learned that too. You just got to have a little sarcasm and sense of humor to make it through everything as you're
That's
still
right.
here.
That's right. Got to laugh at yourself and someone else all in one.
Exactly. That's got to have humor.
Yes.
Thank you again, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.